There are two things Brian Gutekunst likes to do in the first round of the NFL draft: pick freak athletes and trade. So we're going to look at some trade options for the Packers on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. You will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We talked yesterday about the cliffs, and the maneuverability just flows perfectly from that. Okay, if you can't get your guys in this range, what do you do? Now, the other part of that is, what if you can go up and get what you want? So when I look at the cliffs that we set yesterday, remember, I felt like the perfect place to get value is to get your cornerback at 25, to get your offensive lineman at 41, go defensive line, your kind of wild card pick at 58. There's a lot of options there. And then safety and linebacker, 88, 91. Don't care how you stack those. So there's going to be offensive linemen there at 41. I'm pretty confident of that. Now, whether or not the Packers like them, whether or not they see value there, I don't know. I don't want to take a linebacker in the first round, no matter what. I don't think there's a linebacker worth a first round pick in this draft, so I'm happy to wait. And same thing 10 times over with safety, right? It doesn't matter if you like the tape. The Packers are just not going to take a player like a Tyler Nubin or a Cameron Kinchins in the first round. They might not take them in the top 3 rounds, maybe 4 rounds. The Packers have basically never drafted someone with that sort of athletic profile in the top 100 in the Brian Gutekunst era. But what if you're worried about getting that guy? Because remember, there are these cliffs. Now, I like the day 2 corners, so I would wait. But what if the Packers are like, you know what we could do with all these picks, 11 picks, they're not all going to fit on the roster. You can try and move up. And you can try and move up to get the guy and still have plenty of ammunition because they have 2 seconds and 2/3. They still have an absolute boatload of ammunition to go up and try and make a move and still have picks to play with. They can get into the top 10 potentially without mortgaging their future. And in particular, because everyone's going to know it's not for a quarterback. Like when the Vikings make it clear they want to move up for a quarterback, they have put it out on Maine. Now, whether it's JJ McCarthy, whether it's Jaden Daniels, whether it's, Drake May, we think it's JJ McCarthy, but everyone thinks that. And usually the thing like that, when you're QB4, a team's going to trade up, like when everyone thinks that, it usually turns out to be wrong. We'll see how much of this is subterfuge. Like they move to get a second first round pick. They're going to move up. The question is for whom? For how much? How far do they have to move up? These are questions the Packers are going to have to ask themselves as they look over the prospects on the board. And so when you look at we just did our Locked On mock draft, and I don't want to spoil anything, though. There was a proposed trade. I agreed to the trade, assuming a certain group of players were not available to me. I ended up getting someone from that group of players, so I did not make the trade. We're going to talk about that trade because it's not something we actually did on the show. But there could be some players that the Packers could target. And what I want to do is I want to go small, medium, large. So the mini move, that's kind of the Jordan Love. Okay, let's go. You go from, 29.30 to 26. You just move up a couple spots to make sure you get your guy. Then there's the big move. The big move is you might have to get in the top 10 if you want a premium offensive tackle in this class. Then there's the medium move. Okay, what can you get for the medium move? There are a couple different positions I think you could get in a medium move. So where do you value these players? That's the question. And so the reason I wanted to do this version of the show after yesterday's show is because as the Packers are mapping this out, they're going to be players that they've got little marks next to. These are our guys. We love these guys. And you want to leave the draft. They're not all first round picks. Some are second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. You want to leave the draft with as many of those guys as you can. Sometimes that means making sure. Now, you go back in history, 2018, the Packers trade out of their draft spot. They go all the way down into the 20s and they come back up to get Jair Alexander. I feel sometimes disingenuous characterizing that as a trade up because it was a trade down first and they ultimately pick after they were originally supposed to pick. But they did give up draft capital to move up to go get Jair Alexander. That's true. They moved up in the first round, kind of a medium move up to get Darnell Savage. They moved up famously in the first round to get Jordan Love. And they've been pretty good about, like, Jair Alexander, really good football player. Jordan Love, really good football player. Now they stick and pick last year, the year before. I'd argue that they would have been better making some other choices in 2022 in particular, but that's not the question that we're asking. Are there players in this draft that for the Packers are worth going up to get? And the answer to that is, well, it depends. So it makes really, that part of it is not compelling radio, and I get that, but are there players that when you have to get mega draft capital to get up to the top 10, are there guys who can make that worth it? I think there is one player for whom it is worth to sort of mortgage everything to go up and get, and that's Joe Alt. The Packers were at the Notre Dame Pro Day earlier in the week. We'll talk about this, but what's interesting is if the Packers want to go basically with any other player besides Joe Alt, there's not a huge difference between offensive tackle 2 and offensive tackle 7. So what you can do is go skip the line and go all the way up. The same is true at corner, where there's not much difference between cornerback 1 and cornerback 4. But after that, there's a pretty significant drop. So what about just moving up? Well, you don't have to get up into the top 10 to do that. And so that affects the cost of, to be sure, but also your appetite to give up assets. Now, you could get Joe Alt, and he could be an all-pro left tackle, but Rasheed Walker's a really good player. So what is the value relative to cost of a move like that? Whereas when you look at corner, for example, or guard, for example, if you trade up for, let's say, Quinyon Mitchell, if he comes in and starts day one for you at corner, he's an improvement over Eric Stokes, I think. Certainly as a draft pedigree standpoint, I think. An improvement over Carrington Valentine, and plays a premium position. That's the kind of move where you go, you can justify the move up, and it's not going to cost you a ton because you probably only have to get to between 12 and 18. You don't have to give up the same sort of premium draft capital to move all the way up. I think there are some small, medium, and yes, large-ish trades that work, that make sense for the Packers. We'll talk about them in a second here on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Sometimes it's really great to just have someone to talk to, someone who's going to listen and not judge, and you may never have to see them again if you don't want to. That's really nice to have. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. Switch therapists anytime with no additional charge. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's start with potential defensive trades. I think this is something that makes the most sense to start with because I think it's the most likely for the Packers to say, this moves the needle for us. The best corner in the draft to me is Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. Now, according to the Athletic consensus board, now remember, this is not the Athletics board. This is not Dane Brugler. This is an amalgamation, an index of boards from around the country to try and get a feel for where these players are more or less slotted. It doesn't mean that's where they're going to go, but we need to have some sort of benchmark here for our exercise. Quinyon Mitchell is 15th on the consensus board. It just so happens 25 plus 58 on the Rich Hill trade value chart, which is essentially the chart that was put together based on recent trades. So based on recent history, this is actually what the NFL has said these are worth, not the Jimmy Johnson trade value chart or any other trade value chart. There are other ones out there, but I like the Rich Hill one because it's based on actual history. So 25 plus 58 gets you to 14.5. Now, are there teams in that range that might be willing to do this? New Orleans at 14, they like to move up, not down. But then 15 is Indianapolis, the kind of team that I think certainly could be saying, yeah, we'd like to add an extra pick in the top 60. That sounds great to us. They might also be in the market for a corner, but who knows what their circumstances are at that moment. So 25 plus 58, the beauty of this is you don't have to give up 41. I don't think there is a defensive player in this draft worth taking 25 and 41 to move up. 25 and 41 gets you to about 9.5. Unless you love Dallas Turner, but they just took, sort of raw-ish freak athlete without, hyper impressive sack numbers from a major college program. I don't know that that's the best use of their resources to move up in a situation like that. This is the big-ish defensive trade up. And I really like it, frankly, because you still get 41. So you still get the chance to have Graham Barton fall to you or to have Tyler Guyton potentially fall to you if you want an offensive lineman there. To have Jordan Morgan fall to you. I think that's a really good position for the Packers to be in. Having 41 and 58 gives them so much flexibility with these trades. All right, let's go medium trade. Medium. And I'm thinking Byron Murphy. We had this discussion earlier in the week. Everydayers are going to remember. What's the future of Kenny Clark? Don't know. We don't know. Well, if you need a pass rusher, an interior pass rusher, in addition to what you get from Devontae Wyatt, Byron Murphy is the guy. Texas, he's not the tallest guy in the world, but tested well. Productivity, pass rush traits. You just have these interior penetrators, Carl Brooks and Devontae Wyatt and Byron Murphy and, Kenny Clark for another year, or if he asks to get traded, those are the conversations we can have. Colby Wooden, those are disruptive interior players. Can they stop the run? We'll see. But you move up in a situation where you go, we need a guy like this because someone like Kenny Clark may be out the door. So this is a little bit of an if-then trade. Byron Murphy is 18th on the consensus board. Well, 25 plus 88. So the first of your 2 third-round picks by the Rich Hill trade value chart gets you to 19. So that's right in line. And I think that's the kind of trade you make. You know, the Rams are 19. They might really like a guy named like Byron Murphy, but they also have not had draft picks in a long time. Maybe they're like, hey, we would love to get in a couple extra picks. That'd be great. Sounds good. Sign us up for that. I think Byron Murphy is a player that could come in and help the Packers. Now, what about a little trade up? A little trade up. Like you want to get the last. You want to be trading up to either get someone at the top of the board, like that number one corner, or the last guy in a tier. So what if Cooper DeJean, Coop. What if he starts falling a little bit, but you're like, we gotta come up. We gotta come up. He's 25th on the consensus board, so I don't know that falling is even the appropriate term here. He's slated to go right where the Packers are going to pick. But let's say you just want to make sure. Well, guess what? You can do that. 25 plus 91, and I'm sorry that this is feeling like math, but your first round pick and your third round pick, the second of your 2/3. 25 plus 88 gets you to 19. 25 plus 91 gets you to about 20. I know this doesn't seem like that big a difference, and it's not. Go up with Pittsburgh and go get Coop. Now, what if you want to trade down? What if, Coop comes off the board and you're like, okay, well, now what do we do? Well, the answer might be to trade down. I happen to think TJ Tampa is someone at the top of that first or the top of that second round I would really like. The trade that was pitched to me was 40, 78, so a second, a third, and 152, which I believe is a fifth, from Washington to move up to 25. Now, I don't know who they were going up to get because they'd already taken a quarterback in the mock. Not to spoil it, and I said, well, the trade value chart says I'm kind of getting the shaft on this. Can we change it? Can we make it 40, 152, and Jamin Davis, the linebacker, 2 years left on his deal, former first-round pick, outstanding athlete. You put those guys together with Quay Walker. Maybe you try and hit on something, and maybe you just say, okay, well, yeah, I'd like to have 78, but at 78, am I going to get a player as talented as Jamin Davis? I don't care about the contract. Like the extra 2 years, because remember, a fourth-round pick, or a second-round pick, or a third-round pick is only a 4-year deal. So if I have 2 years left on this deal, like that difference, that delta in talent, probably worth it for me. Then I would have 40 and 41. And I still might be able to get a corner that, for at least me personally, I would be comfortable taking in the first round. So let's say the corners come off the board. The top 4 guys all come off the board. They don't love Kool-Aid. The tackles are gone. And they feel like, okay, well, one of Graham Barton, Jordan Morgan, Zach Frazier, even Tyler Guyton, like they're going to be there at 40. Let's just move down, get that guy. You can still get your corner and your offensive lineman. Plus, you can add some pieces. In this case, an actual player. Maybe that's the player trade that Brian Gutekunst has been talking about potentially making. Does that make sense for the Packers? I think it could. And maybe the player trade comes on draft night, where they're like, okay, someone got a little desperate, or they got the right player, or they got the wrong player at a certain round, and they're able to come in and swoop. Certainly something that I think is within the realm of possibilities. Now, the offensive side of the ball. Who are the players that make sense on the offensive side of the ball? We'll get into that next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets. Did you have Kentucky? You probably had Kentucky. You almost certainly had Kentucky. I think 99.9% of brackets had Kentucky. Guess what? You don't have to be SOL with FanDuel. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. You had Kentucky, didn't you? Bet on every game. What are you waiting for? Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Joe Alt is the preeminent left tackle in this draft. There was some questions. Could Olufushanu get in there? The answer seems to be no. It's Joe Alt. Special movement skills at his size. Former tight end. Just a terrific player. He's 7th on the consensus board. There's going to be 4 quarterbacks who go, and I mean, legit, the next 3 picks could all be receivers. But one of those is probably going to be an offensive tackle, just given the way the league works and given the coaches involved. Jim Harbaugh is picking at 5. I don't know. 25 and 41. So your first and your high second only gets you to between 9 and 10. That is just not going to do it for Joe Alt. Like, someone is going to take him. The Bears are going to take him at 9 if he's there. The Jets are going to take him at 10 if he's there. No trades, no nothing. I mean, look, the Falcons might take him if he's there. That's how good Joe Alt is. And I would think the Titans at 7 if he's there. Now, what you could do is go 25 plus 41 plus 58. So your first and your 2 seconds gets you to 5. Chargers, their first draft. Maybe they just want to add a bunch of draft capital. That team is like low-key not very talented. Going from 5 to 25 stinks, but to add 2 other premium picks is pretty good. You could go up, get Joe Alt, and do that. Now, personally, I don't think the improvement that you would get from Rasheed Walker to Joe Alt is worth giving up all those draft picks. Like, I think it makes more sense to take players at 25, 41, and 58. I think that aggregate value will be higher. So I just wouldn't do that. But one that does interest me. What if you wanted to go up and get Talais Fuaga, Oregon State? Some people think he's a tackle. Some people think he's a guard. If he's a guard, he is the best guard in the class and maybe a future all-pro caliber guard. Brandon Thorne from The Athletic, and he's got his own Substack. He's been on the show before. Really great guy. And no one evaluates offensive line better in media than he does. He thinks Fuaga is like a no-doubt all-pro kind of guard, like Zach Martin. Well, you could do the Quinion Mitchell deal. 25 and 58. Your second first-round pick. Go up and get to 14 for Fuaga. Maybe he's there, maybe he's not. I think you could do the same thing for Troy Fautanu, who could be a tackle, could be a guard. Maybe that's the perfect kind of player for the Packers. Let him compete at tackle, let him compete at guard, and see what shakes loose. Outstanding movement skills, can play tackle, can play. I think there's some teams that are going to let him play tackle. The Packers might be one of them. But I think this offensive line class, personally, is just too good to worry about it. Now, if what they really want is a tackle, would they go, okay, the last of this top group of tackles, at least according to the consensus board, is really Tyler Guyton, because Jordan Morgan is probably a guard. Graham Barton is an interior offensive lineman. Jackson Powers-Johnson is an interior offensive lineman. We're fudging and calling those guys tackles. Jordan Morgan probably, although I think Jordan Morgan potentially from Arizona, he like just long enough arms that you could make him a tackle. But if you wanted the true tackle, like someone like, no doubt this guy's a tackle, Tyler Guyton is that guy for me. 24 on the consensus board. Well, what if you just did the Coop trade we were talking about, 25 and 91? You still keep your third. You just move up a little. You move to like 20 just to make sure you get your guy. I mean, you might be able to move up and get Amarius Mims if you like him better, the 19th player on the consensus board. I kind of like that. If that's what you want to do in the first, like if you really feel good, and I personally feel good about the day 2 corners. You guys know I like Kyrie Jackson. I like TJ Tampa. I like Kool-Aid McKinstry if he's going to be a second day pick. I like Cam Hart in the 3rd round. So I'm not as worried about making sure you get that guy in the first. It's so funny too, because, whoever I draft, someone's like, well, why would they take a corner in the first? Where everyone else, like if I take a tackle, they're like, why didn't you take a corner? So it's hard to please everyone is the moral of that story. But that mini move, really on both sides of the ball, I think makes sense. Try and get the last true tackle if that's what you want. And if you don't, hey, Graham Barton might fall right in your lap. Jordan Morgan might fall right in your lap. Like those are Packers types all day. Maybe they're there at 41. But that's the risk you run. And so to me, I like the round 2, round 3 corners better than I like the round 2, round 3 linemen. And nothing is more important right now on this offense than protecting Jordan Love. So I have no problem saying I will bet on that. I will take that risk and go get that offensive lineman. All right, back next week. We are one step closer. We'll be a few days closer to the NFL draft. Are you ready? This is when it starts to get a little silly, because we're a month out, and then it becomes Lion season, all the obfuscation. We're still going to try and have fun. We're going to get some interviews. I'm going to actually be on vacation next week, but I'm still going to bring episodes. We're going to have Jason Hirschhorn, America's guest, on the show. So plenty more to come here from your friends at Locked On Packers. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast. iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers. Go follow us on the socials. Locked On Packers, Twitter, Locked On Packers, Instagram, Locked On Packers, TikTok, Locked On Packers, YouTube, so you can stay Locked On Packers.